UNLV Microcertificate Economics. Now let's talk about costs and a few other concepts. So let's dig a little deeper here, put some words onto things. The most important thing when we come to producing is usually this relationship between labor and capital. If we look at a car plant in the United States, it produces maybe 250,000 cars a year. It's heavily dependent upon robots and automation. If we look at a car plant in Brazil, it produces maybe 50 or 70,000 cars a year, and it has far fewer robots, far less automation, and far more human beings involved in the production process. So something makes us choose between labor and capital, and somehow that choice between labor and capital is going to depend on conditions where we are. Or it may depend on the state of technology. There's all kinds of reasons. But every business you look at, there's this labor capital. I used to work at Burger King a long time ago. And at Burger King, we used to have 12 people on for the lunch shift. Well, now Burger King has automated. They don't have people sitting in the back making drinks. They realize that the people making sandwiches or doing the passing stuff out have some extra time, and fries is not a full-time job, and blah, blah, blah. And they have fewer people and more machines in the building. Okay? And McDonald's over time is doing everything it can to cut back on how many workers it has to have in the building and replacing them with machines. So remember that capital is human-made instruments of production. When we say capital, we're not talking about money the way, or financial capital the ways a lot of people do. We're talking about anything that's made by human beings whose purpose is to make other things. And we want to talk about producing in that world. So much in economics traces back to our buddy Adam Smith. One of those things is one of the first stories in Adam Smith's book, which is his study of pin making. And you wouldn't think that pin making would make for a good story, but it does, because Adam Smith is writing just as we switch from doing almost everything by hand to doing everything in a group or as a team. So Adam Smith looked at people who made pins by themselves, and then he looked at people who made pins on an assembly line. And what he talked about is what we would call the division of labor. So if you're making pins by yourself, you get some wire, you cut a piece of wire off the length of the pin, you make a head, you attach the head to the pin, and there's apparently about 40 separate steps that went into making a pin. Well, now you take those 40 steps and you divide them up among 40 different people. And so each person does one thing. So somebody's sitting there going chop, 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 chop all day long and cutting little pieces of wire for the pin part. And somebody's grinding you with me? What Adam Smith found wasn't that people who do it split up are twice or three times as productive as people who did it by themselves. They might be hundreds of times more productive than people who did each part by themselves. So we build this world where there's this division of labor, and you already know from when we talked about Karl Marx that he thinks this is a bad thing, essentially, that it gives capital dominance kind of over labor. People like Abraham Lincoln, for example, said even in his age he thought that labor really was the controlling interest and we should pay attention to labor. But this division of labor is critical in the modern world. So what do we know about the costs of things? Well, in our business, we have two kinds of inputs. We have what we call fixed inputs, and we have what we call variable inputs. So your workers are mostly a variable input, right? If it's a slow day at McDonald's, they'll go to the boss, will go to someone and say, hey, you want to go home early? And those people always go, yes! And they're out of there, ignoring the fact that they just give up a bunch of money. Usually labor is a variable cost. I can increase or decrease the amount of labor I'm using very easily. Okay? Your building is a fixed cost. You can't say, oh, it's a slow day, and shrink your building down for a few hours and then make it bigger tomorrow. The building is one size. It's a fixed input. The number of tables in your building are fixed. The size of the broiler to cook the burgers on in your building is fixed. So you have some things that are variable. How much lettuce you use is variable. And you have some things that are fixed, size of the building. Those, and I put the word short run up here because if you give me enough time, I can change anything. I can make my building bigger. I could make my building smaller. McDonald's is making some of their buildings smaller and adding a second drive-through because of the pandemic, right? So in the short run, I can't make changes and everything is, but in the long run, I can think of everything as being variable in a long period of time. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this short run. So fixed inputs create what we call fixed costs. And variable inputs create, strangely enough, what we call variable costs. And together, we create something called total costs. Now, in between there is our friend marginal cost. We talked about marginal before. Marginal means the cost of one more. So I need to know what the cost of making another burger is, right? If you go to a restaurant, a lot of times they'll have senior discounts between 3 and 5. Well, their workers have to be there, but their workers aren't working very hard between 3 and 5. I have to pay them. I want them to produce more. How do I get them to produce more? I charge a lower price, right? Because I'm already paying the workers. The marginal cost of producing an extra burger at 4 o'clock in the afternoon is the cost of the bun and the lettuce and the beef and the, right? Because I'm going to pay the workers, they're already there. So the add-on cost of making that burger is only the actual physical burger part because my workers are sitting there bored. They don't have anything to do. Okay? So I can also calculate what we call average cost or what you might think of as per unit cost. That's the cost per hamburger spread out over the course of the day. But that's not the cost that matters. The cost that matters, again, is this marginal cost. This cost of producing one more. Right? Another little cost lesson of economics, and we'll talk about this more over time, is what we call sunk costs. Once I've spent the money, once I've built my building and put my equipment in it, how I operate that is irrelevant to the fact that I already put that in. Once I told that worker to come in for the day and I'm going to pay him for the day, now that's a sunk cost. If I can't recover it, it's gone. And I shouldn't worry about things that are gone. And people do. People leave their business open way too long. They start a business and it's failing, but they say, oh, I put so much time and so much effort, I can't give up now. Well, maybe you should. Okay? The cost that you've incurred in the past should not affect your decision making in the present and in the future. It's this marginal cost that matters. The cost of doing more of something is what matters. Okay? And again, we're going to talk about this over and over and over again. So, let's think about Chipotle. So I've got a Chipotle. Here's my building. It's fixed in size. I have the area where I make the burritos. That's fixed in size. I have my area where I cook the chicken. That's fixed in size. The only thing I have that's really truly variable is how many workers I have. If I have one worker, they're not going to be very productive because they're going to have to do everything down that whole line, including run the cash register. They're always putting gloves on, taking gloves off. It's not going to work. When I add a second worker, now I can have one worker work the end of the line, work the cash register, one worker make the burritos come down the line. Now those two are probably going to be even more than twice as productive as the one. I add a third worker. One works half the line, one works the other half of the line, one works the cash register, or one cooks, and you get the idea? As I add 4 or 5 or 6 workers, though, the advantage of adding those workers goes way down, right? If I already have 2 people working the line and 1 person back cooking and 1 person working the cash register, what do I get from a 5th worker? What do I get from a 6th or a 7th or an 8th worker? Right? Very little. You with me? So maybe going from 1 worker to 2 workers is highly beneficial, more than double. But going to 3 and then 4 and then 5 and then 6, not so much, especially at some point. Okay? So we talk about this thing called the marginal product of the labor, and it's the additional production I'm getting from adding 1 unit of labor. So if the first worker makes 10 burritos an hour, the second worker I can make 25, the third worker I can make 35, the fourth worker I can make 42. Each step there, the first worker, their marginal product was 10, the second worker's marginal product was 15. That is between 10 and 25. The next worker only went to 35, their marginal product is 10. Okay? So the marginal product of labor, additional production I get from adding 1 worker. How do I decide how much I can pay my workers? Well, the answer is I have 2 workers that were each adding 10 burritos and 1 that's adding 15. If I'm going to pay them all the same, I have to pay them less than 10 burritos equivalent. Okay? I can see from looking at the marginal what kind of wage I should be paying. Okay? So when the quantity of 1 input is fixed, when I can't adjust my store, something's fixed, we get something called diminishing margin returns or diminishing marginal productivity from adding the variable input. So the variable input is going to drive everything. It's going to drive how much we can pay people. It's going to drive what productivity is. It's going to drive everything because it's changing as we add more. And there's some optimal level, some best level. And we're going to find that best level by comparing the marginal benefits of doing something with the marginal costs. What's the benefit of adding that worker to what's the cost of adding that worker? Okay? We're going to call that comparison all kinds of things. We might say it's comparing marginal revenue to marginal cost. We might say it's just supply and demand. But we're comparing the benefits of 1 more to the costs of 1 more. Okay, and we get this law of diminishing returns, as we call it, again, as we add more of a variable input, given that we have fixed inputs, eventually adding more of that variable input, the value of that will go down and go down and go down and go down. And that means there's a point where we have the right amount of that variable input. Okay? The importance of this, again, is productivity creates my cost. So if 1 worker can make 100 pencils a day, and that worker gets paid $50 a day, I'm getting 2 pencils for every dollar that I spend. 2 pencils per dollar. Okay? If I can figure out some way to get 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 pencils per dollar, now everybody is going to be better off. The workers are worth more, right? There's 50 cents of labor in a pencil. If my pencils sell for $1, I want to get that 50 cents down, right? I don't like 50 cents. It's too high. Okay? So the more burritos or pencils we make per worker, the lower the cost of the burrito or pencil, the more the worker is worth to the business. These things are inversely related, right? That there's this relationship between costs and production and fixed things and variable things and all of this stuff that we as economists need to understand and be able to work with. So, and again, most of the time we're in what we think of as the short run. And in the short run, we have fixed and variable things. In the long run, everything at some point becomes variable if we wait long enough. So, in the long run, again, if we wait long enough, we can make a bigger store. We can put new technology into our store. We can fundamentally change the way we do business because we have a pandemic or people are not driving or they're driving or they have apps or you with me? We can't change those things in the short run, but we change them in the long run. And again, why? We want to make the most money we can. In the long run, we might also do something that we call replication, which is not to make our store bigger, but to build more stores. I have all of these choices, right? Eventually, over time. But in the short period, I've got to compare that capital and labor and decide what the best thing is for now. And then I get to decide what the best thing is in the future.